And messages. This trail led them to one name, Ezekiel James Watkin, known as Zeke among his friends. He was Kathy's friend and was also dating her other friend, Jamie Marlowe.
First person you always look at is the boyfriend, and Zeke was the only boyfriend she had ever had. They dated for a few months, a couple years prior. He was 2 years older than Kathy, but they met at school. And they were both part of a group of kids that hung around together.
He was Kathy's ex-boyfriend, and their relationship had come to a bitter end. He'd also begun dating her best friend, Jamie Marlowe, immediately afterward.
It was shocking. I don't know, it's like a girl code. You don't date your friend's exes at all.
However, the police said an even more compelling reason to investigate Zeke. He chatted with Kathy multiple times on the very day of her disappearance. This was more than enough for the police to crack the case wide open and bring in the first suspect for questioning. During his interview, Zeke had walked in like he had nothing to hide. He told the police their suspicions were baseless and that he and Kathy were close friends. Although they had separated on bad terms, it was all history now. Detectives then asked him to recount his routine on the night of Kathy's disappearance. He answered that he'd been with his friend John Carpenter gaming the night away. Before the detectives could confirm Zeke's alibi, he provided them with one last interesting piece of information.
Zeke seemed like he cared for Kathy and that he was concerned that she was missing. He told us that he thought she had a new boyfriend And Zeke wanted to help us find out who this new boyfriend was, because he figured that's probably where she was.
Kathy might have been dating other people, but Zeke didn't know their names. It all seemed very convenient for him, so detectives asked about the SMS exchanges between him and Kathy that day. To this, Zeke replied that Kathy had wanted to hang out with him, but he'd turned her down. To clarify his story, they turned to Zeke's alibi. John Carpenter was not only Zeke's alibi, but also one of Kathy's friends. So when he walked in, the police had other interests as well. However, he told them he'd not seen Kathy on the day of her disappearance.
John said it was true that Zeke was at his house all evening and all night and had never left.
But since they had been friends, John might have been covering for Zeke. To rule out any deception, they decided to administer a polygraph test.
I wanted to give Zeke a polygraph to eliminate him so we could get on with other suspects.
Zeke nailed the polygraph test with ease. With him out of the picture and no leads left, the investigators were at a dead end. Desperate for a breakthrough, they decided to start from scratch, retracing their steps all the way back to the Chou house, the place where it all began. As Ezekiel had indicated, if Kathy had been seeing someone else, the police needed to look for her devices. Her mobile phone was likely with her, wherever she was. However, her computer was sitting back in her room, possibly with leads, as she had led a very active online life. A teenager's computer can reveal a lot. They arrived at Chou's home, prepared for anything. But before they even had a chance to check behind the screen, they uncovered something far more disturbing than they had ever imagined. The case had now taken a sudden turn against the parents. Their uncooperative behavior raised a red flag. Detectives suspected they were hiding shocking secrets. Henry Chou suggested to the detectives that he'd get his daughter's laptop examined by his own sources and let the police know if something of interest was found. However, the police had sensed trouble and already had their noses to the ground. Without taking much time, the Chous were brought in for questioning.
I was very shocked that he wouldn't give us the computer. I mean, he wants us to find his daughter, but then he would not cooperate.
Despite this, Henry Chou decided to take the test. When the test commenced, Henry was very emotional and couldn't stop talking about his daughter. The detective wondered if that would affect the test. However, when results came in, the investigators were even more confused than they had been at the start.
Mr. Chou's polygraph results came back with no opinion.
Henry had been very upset and was crying. Due to this, they had to stop the test in between multiple times. And so the test failed to yield any solid results.
Is it just his memories and emotion of his daughter missing, or is there something else going on?
Investigators then had to go around and collect more information about the Chou family by speaking with the people in their neighborhood and friends. The Chous were Taiwanese immigrants who kept to themselves. Their family was very private. They rarely invited anyone over for dinner and didn't visit others either.
Kathy's parents, if they invite you in their house, that's the biggest honor that you can get.
The investigators slowly realized that it was just the family's way of living, and there was not much to base their suspicions on.
I think the Chows wanted to protect their privacy, and in their experiences growing up, the police could not be trusted.
Henry and Debbie Chou took some time to trust the police enough to be forthcoming.
The day Debbie was supposed to take the polygraph was Kathy's birthday. We didn't realize that. And so, of course, she was going to be very upset. And no wonder she couldn't take the polygraph. I mean, she wouldn't have made it through it.
Just when the investigators thought all leads had gone cold, the most unexpected twist arrived on their doorstep. A visitor they never saw coming. Henry Chou came forward with the evidence crucial to the investigation: Kathy's computer that he'd been withholding. After this, the Chous were soon eliminated as suspects. Now the investigators had pinned all their hopes and energies on that single piece of evidence, her computer. Their gut feeling turned out to be right, since it would give them not 1, but 8 leads. Ezekiel was not wrong about Kathy's romantic interests. She had a secret digital life, and the forensics analysts were able to crack their way in. She was seeing other people, or was at least trying to find a partner.
When we got Kathy's computer and got the results, we found that she wasn't just on social media, but she was on numerous dating sites and meeting lots of men. She was in contact with 8 men around the time of her disappearance.
This was a major glimmer of hope in the investigation of Kathy's disappearance.
Kathy was talking to a lot of guys on the internet. She was so excited about the prom, and she didn't want to go alone.
The investigators were going all in, and they ran background checks on all of the 8 men Kathy was in conversation with. They were finally on the right track.
You're meeting someone online and you know nothing about them. You have no idea if this is a good person, if this is a violent person. You just don't know.
Some of these suitors had a history of assault. Around this time, investigators also received another important piece of information. Kathy's last phone ping had been at 9:48 p.m. on April 18th on the night she'd gone missing. The location tracked via the phone signal was Boulevard Park.
Some stranger that just picked her up, put her in the van. That's what was going through my head. Some crazy guy that grabbed her.
Had she invited someone from her online world to the park to meet them in person? It was possible. Reaching in this direction, the investigators went all the way. They called each of these 8 people, one by one, to drop by the department and have a conversation.
Maybe Kathy went on a walk knowing that one of these guys would be waiting for her to meet her somewhere, and one of these guys might have killed her. We wanted to find out how long they had known her, if they met Kathy in person or online. A couple of those guys had assault charges. We gave each one a polygraph.
As the men were tracked and poured in for interrogation, the search parties continued looking for Kathy.
We sent the tracking dogs out around the area where Kathy's phone was. There's a swampy area, a lot of it's overgrown, so we're relying on the dog scent to search the entire park.
The detectives weren't ready to back down from their fight for Kathy. All 8 of these men were thoroughly investigated, but the results would plunge the case into deeper darkness, leaving the detectives clueless.
Each of these guys passed no deception. I was thinking one of these guys was going to be our suspect. We had no place to go after this.
They were now back to square one with no new leads. They didn't know where Kathy had gone after coming to Boulevard Park, whether she'd run away or if she was even still alive. As months passed, it seemed as though the case had come to a temporary standstill. However, Kathy's friends had still not given up on her.
My mom drove me around to see if we saw her around the areas that she liked to hang out around. We went to South Center Mall. We went around to the parks, the areas that she liked to walk. We went to everywhere.
Search parties were sent out and had been looking for Kathy at the South Center Mall, covering her walk route, but no new leads emerged. Then the police established a dedicated tip line for Kathy. Many people claimed to have seen Kathy, but they all turned out to be cases of mistaken identities.
It was disappointing when people said they saw Kathy. Your heart jumped like, yay, and then find out it was a no, and then you're way down below the floor.
As the 1-year mark of Kathy's disappearance approached, her case seemed to be only a few steps away from turning completely cold. But destiny had a different plan. Someone's delicate house of cards was trembling, with each piece ready to expose the dark truths they had desperately tried to hide. And to the detective's surprise, it would lead to Kathy's ex-friend. Jamie Marlowe, Kathy's friend, was coming to school wearing shoes identical to Kathy's, a disturbing detail that didn't go unnoticed. What made it worse was that they didn't look new. They were worn as though they'd been used for some time. Was this a heartfelt tribute to her missing friend? An attempt to copy Kathy's style and steal her identity? Or, most unsettling of all, could they actually be Kathy's shoes?
One day I had everybody coming up to me, just like, you wouldn't believe there's these shoes that look like Kathy's shoes. I'm like, where? Who?
The development stunned Kathy's friends. However, they decided to not intervene until they had a better reason. But what came next was the strangest turn in the events of this case. Within the next few days, an anonymous call rang into the Renton Police Department. It was from a girl who was not willing to give her name, but had important information related to the disappearance of Kathy Chou. She told the police that if they wanted the truth, they should probably look into someone they had completely overlooked until now: Gio. Giovanni Candelario, better known as Gio, was one of the friends in Zeke's circle. When the authorities reached out and asked him to come in for questioning, he didn't hesitate. He agreed immediately, walking in with an air that suggested he'd been anticipating this moment all along.
How did you know Kathy Chou?
I met her through a friend of ours, Eden, doing girls in school, stuff like that. I think she had a class with me. With them, it was like, oh yeah, come hang out, just play video games, And everyone, after school, pretty much everybody that we knew, our friends group, used to hang out in the house.
Gio was John's roommate. During his interview with the police, he badmouthed Zeke with all his might. It became quite clear that Zeke and Gio had had a falling out. Due to this, Gio was about to sell him out for a huge secret. Zeke and Kathy had once been inseparable. He was her first and only boyfriend, but their romance had ended in flames. The breakup was nasty, an emotional battlefield that left scars for Kathy. But what came next was far worse. Zeke hadn't just moved on, he'd moved in on Jamie Marlowe, Kathy's best friend. The betrayal rocked Kathy to her core, and the shockwaves spread through her entire circle of friends. Jamie, once beloved, became an outcast, her loyalty now in question. Friends whispered behind her back. Her invitation stopped coming. It was as though she'd vanished from their lives. But just when the detectives thought they had a grip on the story, another twist hit them like a lightning strike. One that would make them question everything they thought they knew.
Do you remember that night?
According to Gio, Zeke had not been with them and John the entire evening Kathy went missing. Rather, he'd joined them after midnight, and when he'd walked in, his clothes were muddy. These statements were alarming for the police. As Kathy had gone out in the evening of April 10th, 2010, and Boulevard Park was particularly swampy, it would have been very easy for someone who met her there to end up covered in mud. If Gio's accusations were true, then Zeke's alibi wasn't real, and he'd not been playing video games with John on the night of Kathy's disappearance. Gio recalled that when he'd inquired about what led to Zeke's clothes being all muddy, he explained that he'd fallen from his motorcycle. But later, when it was revealed to be the doomed night of Kathy's disappearance, it had irked Gio. However, he hadn't said anything until very recently.
I was wondering why you didn't give us a call and tell us about this about a year ago.
To be honest, I was not to expect. I was, it started hitting me way after things have happened. Like, I started noticing his mood started changing with things.
Gio elaborated that Zeke had changed a lot in the last year. He'd snap at his friends and lose his temper at trivial matters. He'd also started stealing from his friends.
He became a us. He started becoming a real and we were like, dude, why are you being like this? Like, why are you? His attitude dramatically changed. We weren't expecting this, Like, it shocked me.
This led to a heated conversation when Gio warned Zeke not to take him for a fool, and that he knew what Zeke was up to on the night of Kathy's disappearance. Gio was bitter and had been trying to get back at Zeke, but to his utter shock, Zeke didn't bother to correct what Gio had implied. This only deepened Gio's suspicions. The anonymous tip and Gio's statements had been enough for the police to get the investigation up and running again. They now set out to revisit the previous suspects for further questioning, even though they'd already been interviewed during the early stages of the case. But in the backs of their minds, the investigators wondered if Gio could go to any lengths to badmouth Zeke.
Gio was coming forward this time because he and Zeke were not getting along. So to get back at Zeke, he came to the police.
Was Gio telling the truth? The answer rested with John Carpenter, Zeke's only alibi. The case was once again revolving around the same friend circle. One testimony had ruled Zeke out, and another had brought him back in as a suspect. To confirm the truth once and for all, John was called back in after a year, and he had some surprises of his own.
Okay, let's go back now to when Kathy went missing. Do you remember that night? You told me that Zeke got there about 7 o'clock to spend the evening and night at your house.
Roughly, yeah. That's what I said.
John's response would shatter the police's composure, leaving them in disbelief.
It was probably a dream though, but because I have a lot of realistic dreams, so it could have been a dream, it could have not been.
John didn't say anything that went against Zeke, but his statements didn't make much sense. Was he trying to contain the damage caused by what Chou had already revealed?
Red lights are going off. Oh yeah, he wasn't there the whole night. And what he originally told us the year before could have just been a dream.
Ironically, John had unknowingly paved the way for the police to begin the investigation against Zeke afresh, and they were about to uncover a truth so explosive it would shatter everything they thought they knew. At last, Zeke was called in. By this time, the police had a solid piece of evidence against him. They opened the questioning with ease, adopting a casual approach, and Zeke seemed disinterested and parroted everything he'd said a year earlier.
I got to clear up questions that I have when I read through the case. That's one of the reasons talking to everybody again.
Kathy texted me saying that she's going to be hanging out with her.
Minutes passed and the interrogation became more heated. The evidence was undeniable, and Zeke's calm facade began to crack.
Kathy's phone records from that night, and then she went missing on the 18th. All those recordings from the cell towers, plotting points, they all show you guys right together, right in the same spot between like your house and your buddy's apartment, that area, that really woody, swampy area.
I could see him deflate. It was like somebody had punched him in the face. And I knew that my suspect was sitting in front of me.
Zeke began to reveal the first bits of truth, which he'd kept hidden for more than a year.
When I asked you, did you see her that night? You said no. And is that really the truth?
Well, probably see her.
You saw her that night.
He'd asked Kathy to meet him that evening since he'd been annoyed. This was because Kathy had been asking Jamie not to date him. The pressure from Kathy and her friends had been so intense that it had felt like a threat to Jamie. Zeke had called Kathy to talk about it at the Boulevard Park, but their conversation had quickly escalated into an argument.
Were you getting mad or heated or anything at all?
Of course, I heard pounds real fast.
Yeah.
And I did have a little angry issue, but it never strayed or anything.
According to him, he had never been the one to act on his angry impulses, yet he'd been armed during that meeting.
I know I carried the knife here and there, just for texting around on the roads.
Kathy saw the knife and had gotten agitated.
Zeke admitted that they started fighting over the knife, at which point Kathy gained control of the knife and cut him on the lip.
Zeke still had a visible scar 15 months later in the corner of his mouth.
Then came the moment they all anticipated in fear, the confession that would change everything.
1 second, the knife cuts me, next, pretty much like, in her throat. So I guess, lastly, jabbed it in her throat.
Was she dead? I mean, did you think she was dead? Yeah.
From the violent scuffle to the hurried burial that night, there was no way he acted alone. The detectives thought John Carpenter was just an alibi, but they were wrong. He was more than a friend. He was the accomplice.
Did you ask him for a shovel? You did.
Yeah.
take the whole way. How far down did you guys take? So that he helped you put her in a grave?
The interrogation had not ended yet. When a missing person remains unaccounted for after several months, detectives often suspect they might never return. They already knew Kathy was gone forever. But the question was, how? According to Zeke's account, her death was an accidental result of a violent scuffle. But could it have been a premeditated killing? The investigators were betting it was. To connect the dots, they called in the accomplice back to the hot seat of interrogation. But this time, everything had changed for John Carpenter. The cards had already been laid on the table.
Zeke has told me, made admissions to me today, that he was responsible for Kathy's death. He said that you helped him dig the grave site.
So, I did. I don't know. And my mind just went blank, and I just looked at him like, he's a friend. And I just can't really turn him down.
John was quite malleable after that and gave the police all the information they needed to build a tight case against Zeke while giving Kathy's family closure. On July 8, 2011, John took the police to Boulevard Park where Kathy had been buried, along with their year-long dark secret. But they discovered something more. It was murder and not an accidental killing like Zeke's story, and the investigators had the body and a way to prove it.
There were multiple stab wounds on her body. Her throat had been slit from ear to ear. So we were able to ultimately show that this wasn't an accident at all. It was murder in the first degree.
Kathy was discovered buried in a small hole. To force her body into the confined space, Zeke had jumped over her body repeatedly and broke her legs. But that butchery was not all. He'd then gone in and removed her shoes, which he later gifted to his current girlfriend, Jamie Marlowe. Henry and Debbie Chou were informed that the body of their daughter had finally been found.
I asked Kathy's parents if they would like to go out to the site where we recovered their daughter's remains. We went out to the scene so that they could lay flowers down in honor of their daughter.
However, in this high school homicide, there was one final confession that was yet to come from Ezekiel.
Did you get her to come out there because you were going to stab her?
How long had you been thinking about doing this before you called her that day?
Ezekiel was sentenced to 21 years in prison. But for his accomplice John, the story differed. It was John's cooperation with which the police had cracked the case wide open. His testimony provided crucial evidence, so despite his involvement in burying Kathy's body, he earned immunity and protective custody. Meanwhile, Jamie Marlowe took the stand and admitted something chilling. She had worn Kathy's shoes, despite finding them disturbingly similar to her missing friends. Fear of the truth, and of Zeke, kept her silent. Whatever had come for Kathy, she was determined to avoid it for herself. The truth came to light only when the young friendships had fallen apart. Who was the anonymous caller in the friend circle that alerted the police to mention Gio's name, bringing the case back into action? Was it Jamie Marlowe, coerced to be in a relationship with Zeke? Or was one of Kathy's friends more involved than we know? Let us know in the comment section below. In this case, Zeke was both the primary and final suspect. Despite acing the polygraph test, he turned out to be hiding the most uncomfortable secrets in this high school homicide. Does this happen more often than we realize? Is this why polygraph results are not admissible in court?
I can't get in there, there's no way.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
It's my neighbor's home, it's on fire.
Do you know if anyone's home?
Yeah, they're home. The whole house is on fire.
When cops responded to a house fire in Guilford, New York on March 1st, 2017, they didn't expect to uncover a chilling plot lifted straight from the script of a blockbuster Hollywood motion picture. Standing outside, Ernest Franklin kept quiet about the most important detail. Their son was still in the house.
Hey, we got one inside the northwest east corner.
Inside the charred remains of the house, firefighters uncovered their son. And with him, the clues to a calculated plot meant to hide a terrible crime.
In the back room, sleeping. How old is the person?
No location at camera.
I can't get to him. I tried to come around the other side. I can't even get close.
As the flames died, a trail of secrets began to reveal the terrifying scope of their plan.
Because I shot a kid in Afghanistan, mother and son. So one way I gave back was doing foster care, and he came along. From day one, I wanted to adopt him.
Don't take the fall for him if you know something, or don't leave anything out.
A little after the fire, it was said in a matter of minutes, $2,000 was gone.
Who said it? One of them said it.
I know, and I'm not telling.
What happened to JR?
I think it's time for our lawyers.
He's over here. I want to talk to my dogs and come back to this.
I tried going on the backside to see if I could get JR out. And when I went around back, the fighter was inside the tree. Tried breaking the windows to get in, and it was too hot.
When the fire started, neither Ernest nor Heather had been home. Ernest had run out chasing after one of his dogs that had run into the woods, and Heather had run out to get some sleeping medicine. The firefighters were taken aback by how Ernest and Heather appeared to be very calm and collected, watching their home burn to the ground. But the true horror was about to be revealed next. It wasn't until a firefighter specifically asked that the couple revealed that their adoptive son, Jeffrey, was still inside. The revelation sent the firefighters into a frenzy, and they poured every ounce of effort into rescuing the teenage boy.
In the back room, sleeping. Fire. How old is the person?
No location at camera. Okay, going to the north.
I can't get to him. I tried to come around the other side. I can't even get close. 09 Tango.
109, go ahead.
09 Tango, being advised that there's still one person in the house.
When one of the firefighters asked Ernest where Jeffrey was in the house, Ernest pointed to a room, and the firefighters were able to break in through the window. However, Jeffrey was not in that room. Instead, he was spotted in another part of the house.
Yeah, come up over on the side. We're able to get up over here. Hey, we got one inside the northwest east corner. Yeah, it's in this back corner over here. We can't even get close to it. Oh, there's a power supply right here. Feel helpless. Watch the boards. There's a couple nails sticking up. I'll get light here. All right, Joe, we're gonna do our best. Sorry. Yeah, it's getting fully involved now.
I can't break into a line. We're stuck. You know what I mean? I can't go.
Yeah, I know. We felt the same way when we walked. We ran up here. We're like, oh my God, we had no idea.
No.
It's hot.
Yeah.
Water's coming, guys. We just got a lot of air coming first.
It wasn't safe enough for us to put our firefighters inside the building. So once we determined exactly where Jeffrey was last seen, we decided to focus our attack onto the fire by standing from the outside of the building and trying to extinguish that as quickly as we could.
They had to take a roundabout way to get to him. That, in and of itself, took up more than 10 minutes of precious time. They rushed to rescue him, but sadly, it was too late. Jeffrey's body was found on his bed inside the house.
We started what we call delayering the room, so a lot of the debris and everything that fell off from the ceiling or from the walls or anything, we started removing some of those items piece by piece, going through and looking for any type of remnants of Jeffrey that may remain. One of the first things we found was actually the bed springs, and then we eventually ended up finding Jeffrey's body. We found him laying on the mattress as though he was sleeping. But something you never forget, and it takes a toll on everybody that's there.
With a heavy heart and a shaken soul, one of the firefighters came out with Jeffrey's burnt body in his arms.
Firefighters found Jeffrey in his bedroom. They carefully...
As Heather and Ernest picked up the pieces of what was left of their lives, the report from Jeffrey's autopsy came back with some chilling results, giving the case a direction the detectives had never anticipated. It was then, when the detectives looked at the report, that they realized Jeffrey's death was no accident. Initially, the detectives had thought that Jeffrey got trapped in the house when the fire started and died due to severe burns and smoke inhalation. However, the post-mortem told a different story. According to the autopsy report, there was no evidence that Jeffrey's lungs had been exposed to fire. There were no signs of smoke or soot in his mouth, trachea, or bronchi, which clearly suggested that the fire was not the cause of his death. In fact, the medical examiners believed Jeffrey had died well before the fire even began, which meant that the delayed response by the firefighters had no impact on his fate. Jeffrey's body had sustained severe burns, and the extensive fire damage made it impossible for the men to play. Jeffrey R. Franklin was born in Binghamton on July 22, 2000, and was affectionately known as JR, a nickname which came from the initials of his birth name. Like his biological mother, Jeffrey was born deaf and had special needs. Due to his parents' inability to care for him, Jeffrey spent his first 10 years moving between family members and various foster homes. During his first decade, he was shuffled among 3 families, struggling with the difficulties of being born deaf and living with autism and being mute. The homes in the Binghamton area where he stayed were ill-equipped to meet his needs. While in foster care, he endured abuse, often going to school with visible bruises. He had limited access to sign language education, which made communication a constant struggle. Jeffrey was difficult to care for. He required nighttime pull-ups and couldn't be left alone even as he grew into his preteen years. Yet, despite everything, Jeffrey radiated joy and a deep love of life. Armed with the knowledge that Jeffrey's death was not an accident, the detectives were determined to learn the truth and figure out what truly happened in the Franklin residence that night. They first interviewed the firefighters who arrived at the scene and tended to the fire after Ernest's neighbor made the 911 call. But little did the detectives know they'd stumble upon something very unexpected. Ernest and Heather's behavior and actions struck them as extremely odd on the night of the fire. On top of that, they told the detectives that neither Heather nor Ernest seemed concerned about Jeffrey and instead focused on their pets trapped inside. Moreover, the firefighters were quite sure that Ernest pointed them towards the wrong room when they asked him about Jeffrey's location.
In the back room, sleeping. Fire. How old is the person?
This seemed like an intentional and conscious decision which wasted precious minutes as the firefighters had to take a longer route to get to the trapped boy. The detectives then spoke to Dominic Gildersleeve, who had been Heather and Ernest's longtime neighbor and friend.
Ernie's my friend, you know. There's some things I'm not comfortable story-wise that aren't...
Just tell us what you think.
We don't truly know what happened up there.
We're trying to...
Right, but...
A 16-year-old died, so...
Right. Something doesn't feel right. I don't know how to explain it.
But your own personal opinion as a person...
My own personal opinion, father, why did he come down here to call my mom to try to save us?
How do you know that's the case?
I can only assume. I don't know. Because, again, with being able to see how clear it was that it was on fire, how far away was he?
Right, to
not know that it was on fire.
Have you had any conversations with him in regards to what happened before or after?
Now, I have not talked to him about any details because with him having PTSD, I'm not triggering it. I just not, you know.
And how do you know he has PTSD?
This is what Ernie's always told me. Even fireworks set him off. He can't be around fireworks. When we had fireworks out here, he actually had to drive away because that was too much for him. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Sure.
You know.
When asked about Heather and Ernest's relationship with Jeffrey, Dominic told the detectives that initially the couple welcomed Jeffrey into their family with open arms and were very happy when they adopted him in late 2011. They provided him with an environment of love and care. Jeffrey was extremely fond of trains, and they nurtured that interest. They bought him train sets and frequently took him on a railroad tour in Cooperstown. But over the years, things started to change. There was tension. Heather acted frustrated with Jeffrey because of his condition. Jeffrey was on the autism spectrum and behaved like a much younger child. At 16, Jeffrey's behavior was more like that of a 10-year-old boy. While Dominic never saw Jeffrey misbehave with anyone, he said that Heather often talked about Jeffrey acting out and throwing tantrums. He told the detectives that Heather and Ernest had even put an alarm on Jeffrey's door to stop him from leaving his bedroom at night and making a mess. Dominic could tell that with time, Heather and Ernest's affection towards Jeffrey began to fade away and was eventually replaced with frustration. Whenever Heather talked about Jeffrey, she sounded very bitter and burdened. Dominic also had 2 children, both of whom were on the autism spectrum, and that's why he felt some sympathy towards Heather and Ernest. However, their frustration with Jeffrey seemed exaggerated to him. When the detectives interviewed the neighbor who made the 911 call, they realized that Jeffrey's adopted father, Ernest, needed to be looked at more closely. The neighbor told the detectives that instead of going inside the house and even trying to save Jeffrey, Ernest knocked on their door and asked them to call 911. Soon, a twist was going to come in the form of a surprise witness who was none other than Ernest's own sister.
How long has Jeffrey been living with Ernest and Heather? I assume they got him when they were together?
Yeah.
Okay.
2005 or 6 as a foster kid. And then 2016 was when they adopted him. And that's when things changed.
All right, so describe the change to me.
They pulled him out of regular school to homeschool him.
Okay. Do you know why they did that?
They said they didn't like the school system.
She recounted to the detectives a conversation she'd overheard, a conversation that had left her utterly shocked.
How is your relationship with Ernie? Do you have any bad blood with him? And don't feel bad about it. No. It's not your position. We need to know that. It's a question I have to ask. Was there anything else that stands out?
There was a comment that was made.
Okay. What was made?
That didn't sit well with me.
Okay. Tell me about it.
It was a little after the fire.
Okay.
It was said in a matter of minutes, $2,000 was gone.
Who said that?
I don't remember. It was just a comment that's stuck.
Who said it? One of them said it.
I know, and I'm not telling.
Here's what I see. I see you trying to be loyal to your brother because you're his sister. But I think considering the circumstances, I'm not trying to tell you what you should do, but if I were in your shoes right now, I'd shift that loyalty to Jeffrey and give us the truth. And I know it's hard for you.
I don't think it was meant for anybody to hear because it was kind of whispered. But because I was standing so close, I heard it. So I didn't say anything.
Who said it? Did Ernie say it to Heather?
Ernie said it.
His son had just died, and he didn't seem concerned about him at all. In that conversation, he specifically pointed out that it would cost him so much money every month to cover the losses. All the information the detectives were able to gather about Ernest made them more and more suspicious of him. He quickly became a prime suspect in the case of Jeffrey's death, as there was evidence that Heather was out shopping at the time. It was now time to call him in for an interrogation.
What do you think happened to JR then?
No, like I've been telling you, the fire. That's all I know.
Okay, but we know that's not the case.
Then I don't know.
Possible. The ME can say, and he's been doing this for decades.
We wanted Ernest to know that we knew Jeffrey was dead before the fire, and we wanted to provide that information to him to see how he was going to react.
He can say that he did not die in the fire. When people die in the fire, there's a lot of evidence. You have soot that you're breathing in. right? And carbon monoxide in your blood builds up, and that's what kills you. It's not usually the heat, it's not the flames, it's smoke inhalation. And two ways they know smoke inhalation: soot in your mouth, in your nose, in your trachea, and in your lungs. And a carbon monoxide level in your blood that's high. JR had none of that. He had no soot, he didn't breathe in any soot, and his carbon monoxide level is what ours are now. Okay, which indicates that he's not breathing in at the time the smoke gets to him in his room. And the only reason he's not breathing in when the smoke gets there is because he's not breathing at all. He's already dead. Something happened to JR.
When the detectives confronted him about their suspicions and his odd behavior regarding Jeffrey's death, he told them an emotional and shocking tale.
We were hoping that he would then break down, maybe give us a confession, tell us exactly what happened that night. He reacted in more of a stubborn way. Throughout the interview process, he was cold, he was unsympathetic, never apologized for what happened to Jeffrey.
Something happened to JR, and then your house catches fire.
Why would I burn my house down?
To hide what happened to JR.
Why would I kill him?
These things happen sometimes. Things weigh on you. I get that. We're both parents. We
do not understand what weighs on me.
You're right. I'm not you. What I'm saying.
You don't even know why I got into foster care.
I don't. Why don't you tell me why?
Because I shot a kid in Afghanistan. Mother and son. So one way I gave back was doing foster care, and he came along. From day one, I wanted to adopt him.
Ernest had served in the Army for a year and a half. He joined the U.S. Army right out of high school in August 2001. He further told the detectives that tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2002 and 2003 left him disabled and depressed. Ever since then, he'd been suffering from PTSD. The guilt of taking a young soul's life away still lingered. And what the detectives learned next felt like a betrayal to them. The emotional story Ernest had told the detectives about his guilt of killing and wanting to become a father ever since then was nothing but a complete lie.
We had already obtained his military records, and we knew what he was stating wasn't the truth. He'd never had any combat time in Afghanistan.
We know something's done to him. We know this. And you know it too. In there, I know you know it. And until you talk about it, it's not going to go away. It's just going to be in there. It's going to fester.
You don't think I don't know that, do you?
Hey, I know you know this, but I'm trying to remind you.
I think it's time for our lawyers.
At that point in time, we have to stop talking to him and get him the lawyer that he requested. But it left a lot of unanswered questions.
Detectives then called in Heather for an interview to see if she knew anything about her husband's suspicious behavior. Heather, who was 27 weeks pregnant with Ernest's child at the time, claimed that she had no clue about anything and didn't utter a word against her husband.
Don't sell yourself out because you're trying to protect him. You're going to end up with your back in the corner.
During the interview with Heather, we told her that Ernest was going to be charged with murdering Jeffrey. And we told her that she needed to put herself and her unborn child first. And if she knew anything, she had to tell us.
He could be putting some on you, thinking that it's going to take it easy on you because you're pregnant and not him, and vice versa. Don't take the fall for him if you know something, or don't leave anything out. Let's just say that. Don't leave anything out. Don't leave anything out. Because when he's on the stand and he's in the hot seat, he's going to tell more of the truth. And if he indicates anything of your involvement or your knowledge, as long as you tell us ahead of time, okay, I'm just saying. And we're just trying to confirm your story.
He doesn't care about you. You can protect your baby. I know how I can protect him.
The truth. And don't leave anything out. If we left anything out, we'll clear the slate and start fresh from here forward. And I'm not going to hold it against you. I won't hold it against you if you left something out, okay? So let's go from here forward, clean slate. What did you leave out?
Nothing that I can think of.
There's gotta be something. There is something.
There's too much.
When asked about her whereabouts on the night the fire engulfed her house, she told the detectives that she'd been out shopping for medicine that night because she couldn't sleep. She left her house late on February 28, 2017, and visited 2 shops looking for medication. However, when the detectives retraced her tracks, they learned that her search for medicine turned into a nearly 3-hour journey through 2 counties that would have covered at least 70 miles. Heather first drove to the Walmart in Norwich, then made her way to Price Chopper in Sydney, explaining later that she was searching for a better deal. After finishing at Price Chopper, she returned to Walmart once more before heading home. When asked, Heather granted the detectives permission to go through her vehicle, and when they did, they hit a jackpot. Although the CCTV footage from the stores confirmed her whereabouts, it also revealed something that would make the detectives question Heather's story and place her under a microscope. Heather stopped at the Walmart in Norwich, but then she returned to the vicinity of her home in Guildford from 12:42 a.m. to 12:46 a.m. She left the house and drove to Price Chopper in Sydney again for about 10 minutes. Then she drove around Bainbridge in Coventry before returning to the fire scene by 2:18 a.m. on March 1, 2017, when the house was already on fire. When the detectives looked at the CCTV footage from both of the stores Heather went to looking for the medicine, the video evidence confirmed that she did not go to the aisles in either store where the drug was stocked. It didn't look like she was searching for the medicine, and she never made a purchase. When the detectives confronted her about her actions, she also lawyered up. From that point on, both Heather and Ernest stopped cooperating and refused to speak to the detectives at all. Secretly investigating the Franklin family's past with Jeffrey, detectives learned a few things. Back in 2011, Jeffrey became eligible for adoption, and by the end of that year, his Aunt Jennifer and her husband were able to find a permanent home for him. A couple who deeply desired children but couldn't have their own wanted to take Jeffrey as their son. Jeffrey's aunt and uncle offered him a choice. He could either continue living with them or have a mom and dad of his own. Excited, Jeffrey chose the latter, longing for parental figures in his life as he'd never truly experienced having parents. Heather and Ernest welcomed Jeffrey into their home with open arms. Heather, who knew sign language, was able to communicate with her new son in a manner that made him feel truly understood and valued. However, this new life, so promising and bright, felt almost too good to be true. And soon, Jeffrey became the victim of a dark and sinister plot that cut his young life short. Even after Jeffrey's death, Heather and Ernest didn't seem to be affected much by the loss of their only child. They were chiefly concerned about the financial loss the fire had caused them and wanted to rebuild their home as soon as they could. Heather and Ernest continued to seek help online. Ernest shared his family's GoFundMe page 3 times on his Facebook account. On March 19, 2017, Heather posted a link to her Check Twice digital wish list of items the couple needed. As Heather and Ernest sought a new start, investigators quietly prepared to build a case against them. But they still needed stronger evidence to charge them. And what came next in the investigation made the detectives realize what Heather and Ernest had truly done on the night of February 28, 2017, and revealed the disturbing source of information for their wicked actions. At some point, when Ernest and Heather were being questioned by the police, they mentioned that the last thing they did before their house suddenly went up in flames was to watch a movie called Manchester by the Sea. The plot of the Oscar-winning movie was based around a man who accidentally killed his children in a house fire. It was this film that gave them the idea that they wouldn't be charged for murder if Jeffrey died in an accidental fire. A father, played by the actor Casey Affleck in the film, is spared prosecution after being told that a person cannot be charged for an accidental crime. But while his performance was convincing, the same couldn't be said about Ernest and Heather. According to the firefighters who inspected the Franklin house, the fire began in the southern end of the Franklin home. It was concluded that after they'd killed Jeffrey, Ernest Franklin started a fire by lighting a wood stove. The vent pipe was functioning properly, but it was discovered that Ernest left the stove door open to allow the fire to spread and consume the house. The firefighters told the detectives something so crucial that it further confirmed Heather and Ernest's evil intentions. The firefighters told the detectives that when they found out about Jeffrey still being in the house, Both Heather and Ernest tried to stall and misdirect the firefighters to the best of their abilities, possibly to make sure that Jeffrey was dead and any evidence they might have left behind burnt to ashes. Heather and Ernest came to realize that parenting Jeffrey was going to be more difficult than they had thought. In a few posts on Facebook, Heather had publicly shared her frustrations where she talked in detail about the challenges of caring for Jeffrey. In one post, she shared that there is a very big strain in the family relationship because of Jeffrey's special needs, and specifically pointed out the trouble she was having with Jeffrey's bowel and urine control issues. Tracking Heather and Ernest's social media activity further, detectives learned that sometime around mid-2016, Heather became pregnant with Ernest's child. Heather expressed her excitement about her pregnancy by posting about it often on social media. In January 2017, she even shared her ultrasound images, celebrating the news that she and her husband of nearly 6 years were expecting their first child. Now that their first biological child was on the way, Heather and Ernest seemed to decide that they no longer needed Jeffrey. Even after Jeffrey's death, Heather and Ernest kept up with their act of expressing grief and sorrow through their social media posts. On March 5, 2017, they even had a celebration of his life at C.H. Lander's funeral chapel and handed out toy train imprinted invitations for the occasion. But the detectives knew of the couple's facade, and they had had enough. After 3 weeks' worth of investigation into Jeffrey's death, detectives made their next move. Armed with witness statements and an autopsy confirming the unnatural cause of death, police arrested Ernest and Heather Franklin on March 22, 2017. They were charged with second-degree murder, third-degree arson, and tampering with physical evidence. 2 days later, on March 24, 2017, the couple was formally indicted on charges of arson and second-degree murder related to Jeffrey's death. At the time, both pleaded not guilty. Bail was set at $250,000 cash for Ernest Franklin and $125,000 cash for Heather Franklin. Michael Trossett, Heather Franklin's lawyer, asked for a more reasonable bond, claiming that Heather's pregnancy was of high risk. And so, while Ernest remained behind bars in the Chenango County Correctional Facility, Heather was released on bail in April 2017. She moved in with her friends who helped her during her pregnancy, and just days after her bail, Heather gave birth to a baby boy. The Franklins were well respected by their neighbors and friends, and while Ernest and Heather Franklin were awaiting trial, the neighbor mentioned earlier, Dominic Gildersleeve, started a GoFundMe page to support the couple. Through that page, he was able to raise more than $11,000 to help Heather and Ernest fight their cases and rebuild their lives. Heather's lawyer, Michael Trossett, said that Heather was innocent until proven guilty, and that the prosecution's allegation about her being inspired by the movie Manchester by the Sea was a leap. On the other hand, Ernest's public defender, John Cameron, went a step further. He and his office hired a forensic pathologist to reinvestigate the entire case, stating that the detectives didn't cover all the aspects. Moreover, he disputed the conclusions of the autopsy report, highlighting that it didn't specify a cause of death. Heather and Ernest's lawyers passed their opinions in public, calling the prosecution's theory just false. According to them, it was the prosecution's strategy to sway public opinion on the case to keep Heather and Ernest Franklin from being given a fair trial. In May 2017, Ernest Franklin pleaded not guilty to the charges. However, after deliberating for just an hour and 40 minutes, jurors in Chenango County Court returned a guilty verdict.
A Chenango County man will spend at least the next 20 years behind bars. Ernest Franklin of Mount Upton was sentenced to 21 years to life in prison on Monday. Franklin and his wife Heather worked together to kill their 16-year-old son Jeffrey, who had disabilities, back in March of 2017.
Ernest was also convicted on additional counts of third-degree arson and tampering with physical evidence. As a result of these convictions, he was sentenced to life in prison. On June 7, 2017, just one day before her trial was set to begin, Heather pleaded guilty to felony charges of first-degree manslaughter, third-degree arson, and tampering with physical evidence. As a result of the plea deal, Heather was handed a maximum sentence of 7 years in prison, with an additional 5 years of supervised release upon her release. When given the opportunity to speak in court, Heather remained silent. Her defense lawyer, Michael Trossett, said that she had taken full responsibility for her actions. In her plea deal, Heather Franklin also admitted that she knew of Ernest's actions while leaving the property on the tragic day her husband murdered Jeffrey. Had her case proceeded to trial, the evidence would have highlighted her mistreatment of and frustration towards Jeffrey, which likely would have led to a significantly harsher sentence. With the truth now out in the open, the people who stood by Ernest and Heather, who believed in them and supported them, felt utterly betrayed. It was a huge shock for their grieving friends and family that Ernest and Heather really did murder their son Jeffrey. The GoFundMe page for Heather and Ernest was taken down with a promise to the donors that their money would be refunded.
I don't know the circumstances. I don't know exactly what happened or what they did or whatever. I can't imagine the fear that was going through his mind, and that really bothers me. All I can hope is it was over quick and he didn't suffer. Sorry.
We remember his laughs, his favorite signs, things that he would do, his quirky little things that he would do. We remember those things, and we remember him often. He deserved a lot more.
Like many foster children, Jeffrey too longed for stability and a sense of family. He'd often hug strangers and even ask spectators at baseball games to share their French fries. Jeffrey developed a deep fascination with trains and cartoon characters, so much that he once wore the mustache from his Mario Halloween costume to school for an entire month. All Jeffrey ever wanted was a mom and a dad who would love and care for him unconditionally. But unfortunately, Heather and Ernest were unable to provide that for him for long. Instead of stepping into a home filled with love, nurturing, and protection, Jeffrey entered a vastly different reality. For the final time in his short life, Jeffrey was failed by the very people who were supposed to keep him safe and secure. Heather and Ernest had other options available to them if they felt so overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising a 16-year-old boy with special needs. They could have returned him to his aunt, Jennifer Austin, who loved him dearly, or they could have given him up for adoption altogether. Instead, they chose the most sinister path imaginable. Currently, Ernest is serving his prison sentence at the Attica Correctional Facility and will have to serve a minimum of 21 years before he's eligible for parole in 2038. Heather's incarcerated at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women, where she'll be eligible for parole in 2025. Meanwhile, the couple's currently 7-year-old son is reportedly under the care of his grandparents. Because of the intense fire, Jeffrey's body had been severely burnt, and a lot of things couldn't be determined by the medical examiners. If the condition of Jeffrey's body had been better, do you think it would have shown evidence that he faced abuse at the hands of his adoptive parents? Heather and Ernest made sure to wipe out as much evidence as they could by making sure the fire consumed the whole house. What sinister truths do you think they were successful in hiding? The autopsy report stated that Jeffrey's death was caused by violent force. Do you think Ernest actually murdered Jeffrey? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you.
Kevin, breathe. Okay? Hey, Kevin, pick your head up and breathe, okay? In and out. In through your nose and out through your mouth. Kevin, what room was it in? Was it in the living room? Was it in the kitchen, or was it in the dining room? Was it in the living room? Was it in the bedroom? Where?
This was the exact moment Kevin Eastman realized that his chilling secret was going to be out. The detectives had been on their toes investigating the chilling murder of 53-year-old Scott Sessions, a known trumpet player famous for his infectious energy and love for music, since his burnt remains were found in Larimer County, Colorado. Detectives might have been inching closer to solving Scott's homicide, but they could never have imagined what other shocking secrets Kevin was hiding. As they kept on digging, eager for justice, they uncovered a series of dark secrets that would reveal a tale of jealousy, betrayal, and a chilling double murder. On February 10th, 2020, a snowplow operator in Larimer County, Colorado, noticed a plume of smoke in the Pingree Park area, about a 2-hour drive from the town of Greeley. When he stopped to investigate and put out the fire, he was horrified to find a human body being consumed by the flames. The body was wrapped in plastic and positioned face down next to a log. Terrified, he immediately dialed 911 to inform the authorities of the horrifying discovery he just made.
I'm on the Pingree Park Road at the Monument Gulch exit, and I have a dead body.
Okay, we'll get help on the way. Are you able to provide any details?
Well, there was a tree on fire, and I went up to put it out, and he's laying next to it.
Okay, and do you believe he's found any help?
Yeah, he's definitely passed away.
After the detectives arrived at the scene, using fingerprint reading technology, they identified the victim as Scott Sessions, a 53-year-old trumpet player known for his infectious energy and love of music.
Scott Sessions was a trumpet player, and he was with us for about 6 years.
This guy's been voted Northern Colorado's best trumpet player, Mr. Scott Sessions.
At the crime scene, the detectives stumbled upon a sight so horrific that it would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The gruesome state Scott's body was in sent chills down their spines. Scott's throat had been viciously slashed, nearly decapitating him. It had been cut so deeply with a knife that his spinal cord was severed. He'd almost been decapitated before his corpse was set on fire. It was evident that someone had a personal vendetta against Scott and wanted to make him go through horrors in his final moments.
There's no indication that this guy was camping. There's no other personal property. He's face down next to a log that's burning bright. There's no vehicles that we could find in the close vicinity. However, we haven't searched everywhere yet, but this is looking like it's possibly a body dump.
Is the body clothed or not?
He is clothed, but it's hard to tell whether it's appropriate clothing due to the condition.
Is he covered in fresh snow?
Because of the heat of the fire. The tracks that we think might have been made by him or whoever was here, there is slight snow covering it, so I don't know how much they got overnight, if it was a dusting or if the wind was blowing. So if he's still there, it doesn't look like this guy had made a campfire.
Later that same day, detectives found his car in the parking lot of King Soopers supermarket. Hoping to figure out who could have held such a strong grudge against Scott, detectives immediately launched an investigation into the homicide. They realized a missing persons report had already been filed by Scott's father on February the 11th, 2020. Scott had told his father he was heading out to meet a friend on Sunday, February the 8th, 2020. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Scott never returned home. Scott was a talented musician, playing with the Movers and Shakers and George Gray's Elvis Experience Band. His life was filled with music, friends, and the joy of performing. Tragically, all that had come to a sad end. It was the members of his band who first noticed Scott was missing when Scott failed to show up for their scheduled gig on Monday night, February the 9th, 2020. This set off alarm bells for everyone who knew him. Scott would never miss a performance willingly. Music was his life.
We had a 3-night stand at a dinner theater. It was opening night.
My boyfriend and I bought tickets to go see George Gray and the Elvis Experience with my friend Scott Sessions, featured on the trumpet. I was super excited.
We were probably about 15 minutes to showtime, and we're all looking around saying, Scott's not here. So a lot of bandmates started texting and then calling, and he wasn't answering the calls over the texts. So The show went on without Scott.
I was like, hey, where's Scott? He never did come out on stage the whole night. And that is when I started wondering what was up. Scott wasn't one to miss a gig.
Scott's friends, George Gray, met with Scott's father, Stanley, and together they went to Scott's house to check on him. When they arrived, they found only his cat, Munchkin, who appeared to have not been fed for several days. There was no sign of Scott. Although the detectives had found him, it wasn't how his father had hoped. That was when Stanley learned the truth.
He had a concert at the, they had a concert, Candlelight Dinner Theater, Monday night. And Scott didn't show up. George called and he said, do you have any idea where he might be? And I said, no, that's the first I knew that there was something.
Because Scott was very dependable.
Oh my God. Yes. He would not miss a gig with he would not. He just, and it was his life.
Okay.
And he had finally succeeded. You know, he was always a little kid and he was always picked on himself. He'd been in counseling since, off and on, all the way from 2nd grade. And along the way, there's been some stuff. You know, I've seen inside of jails I never ever expected to see. I met law enforcement people up and down the Front Range, and I went and gathered him up a few times from jail. But it looked like he had really turned the page. And I tell you all of this because my reaction to your telling me he was deceased was I wasn't surprised very much, because I think we had been close to this place times before, years and years ago.
Sure.
So I didn't know. I didn't react because I guess for 50 years I've been conditioned that something could go wrong.
An autopsy conducted on Scott's body revealed small amounts of caffeine and marijuana in his system. Since the body had been severely burned, any traces of any foreign DNA that might have existed were gone. With little to no help from the autopsy report, detectives moved on to examining Scott's devices and online presence. On February 14, 2020, the police made a significant breakthrough when they accessed Scott's Facebook account using a recovered password and stumbled upon the most defining twist in the case. They discovered that the last person he'd communicated with prior to his disappearance was a woman named Heather Frank, who was Scott's girlfriend. Cell tower data confirmed that Scott's phone had been in the vicinity of Heather's home on the evening of February the 8th, and it remained there until the morning of February 9th, when it went dead. Although the detectives had found a suspect, the most crucial piece of evidence, Scott's phone, was never recovered. Going through the thread of messages exchanged between Heather and Scott, they learned that on the 8th, the day Scott disappeared, Heather had reached out to him via Facebook Messenger at around 5 p.m. with a brief but inviting message asking if he wanted to come over. Excited to see her, Scott responded eagerly and told her that he'd take a shower and head over as soon as possible. Heather told him to hurry and bring some beer. A little while later, he messaged her again to say he'd picked up the beer and was on his way. What seemed like a casual evening between two people most likely took a dark and sinister turn right from the moment Scott arrived at Heather's place. Investigators interviewed Scott's bandmates once again to learn more about Heather. She was a 48-year-old mother of 3 adult sons and had been dating Scott for a very short time. She had met him merely 18 days before that fateful night of February the 8th, 2020. Detectives learned that Heather had attended a blues concert in January 2020, where she had a chance encounter with Scott. She found herself instantly captivated by the charismatic musician, and the two quickly felt a connection. Both shared a creative and artistic sensibility, which only deepened their bond. They began spending time together, going on a few dates that felt full of promise and excitement. To those who observed their budding relationship, it appeared to be the start of a whirlwind romance, marked by mutual admiration and a shared passion for creativity. With the evidence they had till this point, the detectives were sure that Heather was somehow involved in Scott's murder, but they were not so sure about how exactly she was involved. They decided to keep an eye on her and track all of her movements, hoping that Heather herself would lead them to stronger evidence. While secretly investigating Heather, detectives learned about her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Kevin Eastman. Heather and Kevin went way back and had first started their relationship about 7 years prior. And after their last breakup in December 2019, Kevin had moved to Parachute, Colorado to live with his sister. And that was when Heather started dating Scott. However, when the detectives took another look at the cell phone data, they learned that on the night of February the 8th, both Kevin and Heather's cell phones were detected at her residence. The following day, both the phones showed movement together until they stopped transmitting signals in an area which had poor cell phone reception. The path they traveled led to Pingree Park, the same location where Scott's body was discovered. The noose of suspicion was getting tighter around Heather and Kevin's necks. Detectives were sure they were on the right track. They placed tracking devices on both of their cars and set up a surveillance camera on a streetlight aimed directly at Heather's house. For nearly a week, they closely monitored every move of Heather and Kevin, gathering crucial evidence to build their case. As law enforcement observed their movements and interactions, they gathered enough information to secure arrest warrants for the couple. However, just as the police prepared to execute those warrants and bring Heather and Kevin into custody, they decided to observe the couple a little longer before bringing them in. The police had planned to arrest Heather and Kevin on Sunday, February 15th, 2020. However, upon reviewing the vehicle tracking data that morning, they discovered that Kevin's car had been on the move overnight. He traveled extensively throughout some isolated parts of the city, making several stops. One of these stops was at a remote ranch property owned by a man named Troy Bonnell, who had also occasionally employed Kevin in the past. Lieutenant Donnie Robbins of the Larimer County Sheriff's Department quickly took action. He drove out to the property in an unmarked car to avoid suspicion and observed Kevin from a distance. Kevin was seen tending a fire on Troy's property. The detectives' priorities changed when they noticed that Heather was nowhere around. When Kevin left and drove to a nearby gas station in Kersey, Lieutenant Robbins followed him. At the gas station, Kevin began filling a portable fuel canister. Fearing that Kevin might use the fuel to destroy more evidence, Lieutenant Robbins decided to act immediately. He arrested him on the spot and took him in for an interrogation about Scott's murder. After securing a search warrant for Troy Bonnell's property, the police began an extensive search, hoping to find evidence that Kevin might have left behind, as well as any clues regarding Heather's whereabouts. However, detectives were shocked but also a little relieved when they didn't find Heather in the containment structure where Kevin had been burning various items. And so the question remained, where was Heather? Was she even alive? Surveillance footage showed Heather leaving her apartment, with Kevin following closely behind, around 5:30 p.m. on February 15th, 2020. This would be the last time she would ever be seen alive. She hadn't reported for her scheduled shift as a manager at Drugs Day Diner in Loveland that Sunday, further raising concern about her well-being. Rita Severin, an experienced investigator with the Larimer County Sheriff's Office in Fort Collins, Colorado, was assigned to the case when Heather went missing. Determined to uncover the truth, Rita diligently worked to gather information, conducting interviews with those who were closest to Heather. Her goal was to reconstruct the events and circumstances that might explain Heather's sudden disappearance. As part of her thorough investigation, Rita spoke with each of Heather's 3 sons, seeking to understand their perspectives and any details they might provide. She paid particular attention to Alexander McLaughlin, Heather's firstborn. Through these interviews, Rita aimed to piece together a clearer picture of Heather's life and relationships, hoping to find clues that could lead to her whereabouts.
Tell me about your mom and Kevin's relationship.
Wild, I guess I would say. Like, in the beginning, when they first met, he's an alcoholic. My mom is pretty much an alcoholic too. they would get into a lot of fights. The first incident of him ever hurting her, he broke her wrist and tried to slit her throat. She told me it was a bar fight, but this was back in 2014, so 5-6 years ago.
And when you say he tried to slice her throat, how do you know that?
Because her throat had a scar, or not a scar, it was scabbed over, like he tried to cut her throat with a dull knife.
Rita also met with Heather's mother, Mary Frank. Although Alex had already provided Rita with detailed information about Heather and Kevin's relationship, Mary confirmed the details and additionally told Rita about the emotional chaos between the troubled couple.
It's like vinegar and oil. I know Kevin cares deeply for her. I'm not quite sure on what she really feels for him. I think at times, yes, she is deeply committed to him, and other times, not so much. My daughter's complicated. There has to be a child in every family, I guess. And she's my problem child. Has been since high school. Mm-hmm. And she just keeps repeating the same routine over and over and over. They're both alcoholics.
Okay.
They are. Now, Heather can control it. She can. For a period of time.
Can he control it?
Yes. Yes. I've seen him do it, and I've seen them both drunker than skunks.
Another investigator visited Doug's Day Diner to speak with the owner, Allie Nolby, who had known Heather for 20 years. They discussed Heather's turbulent and sometimes violent relationship with Kevin. Allie told the officer that Kevin suffered from a drinking problem and was unemployed. He physically abused and threatened Heather and even wanted to control her.
Because things got rocky. There was a couple times where she wouldn't come to work, and then she'd show up and I'd meet her outside. She'd be black and blue. And you have to understand, her and Kevin were together for a really long time. Their relationship was really good, and then it started getting crazy. Just some of the things that she would tell me is he was very physical. If they drank together, it would get extremely physical, so she started going to therapy. They both wanted to do couples therapy. That wasn't working. So, she would tell me that she would want to break up with him, but she was afraid that he wouldn't take it well. As a friend, my husband, we offered to go with her to help her get her belongings so she wouldn't be alone. And that kind of went on and on. We never actually did.
Allie also shared that Kevin had proposed to Heather 3 times, but she declined each time. Although they'd been living together, Kevin had moved out a few weeks ago to his sister's place in Parachute, Colorado, in an effort to sever ties with Heather permanently. Less than a year earlier, a police officer had responded to a hospital in Denver where Heather was being treated for injuries caused by Kevin during an incident at a hotel.
Can we turn the lights on? I just got assigned this call. You want to tell me what happened?
Just argument in the hotel room. Punches to the left side of my ribs. And I had to get out of there because it was going to hurt me worse. So I left.
Who did this to you?
Kevin Eastwood.
How many times did he punch you?
3 times. Just get away. Like he always does. This is the first time he's done this to me.
Although Heather didn't always report the abuse she suffered at Kevin's hands, an assault warrant was issued for him following this attack. But he wasn't arrested at the time. As the investigation progressed, Larimer County officers interrogated Kevin Eastman at the police station, probing into the details of his recent actions. Under the pressure of the thorough police interrogation, Kevin Eastman made several startling claims. He stated that on February the 8th, he'd visited Heather's home unexpectedly. To his shock, he found Heather and Troy in the midst of trying to dispose of Scott's body. Kevin further asserted that in the chaos, Troy had become overwhelmed with panic, which led to an unintended and tragic accident that resulted in Heather's death. This version of events presented by Kevin was a critical component of his defense strategy and added complexity to the investigation. At the same time, detectives were also questioning Troy Bunnell about what transpired on his property on the night of February the 15th, trying to piece together the events that led to the tragedy. Troy informed the police that Kevin had been scheduled to come over a few days earlier for some work, but hadn't shown up, which made his unexpected arrival that evening surprising. When Kevin did arrive, he offered excuses for his absence and began unloading tools into Troy's garage. Kevin's behavior appeared normal and cheerful, which led Troy to believe that there was nothing unusual about the visit. But Troy did not supervise Kevin's activities outside. Instead, he went back inside to spend time with his girlfriend, who was visiting him that evening. While Troy was being questioned by the police, he maintained that he'd not seen Heather at his property at any point. However, that didn't stop the detectives from inspecting every corner of Troy's property, which soon led them to another horrifying discovery. They stumbled upon what they dreaded the most: Heather's charred body. The body was discovered concealed beneath a large piece of wood. Her remains had been wrapped in plastic and wire. She had 2 wounds on her chest. Detectives confirmed that Heather had been shot twice in the chest at close range with a small caliber firearm. When the detectives broke this news to Troy, he appeared clueless about the whole situation.
So here's the thing, I know it feels like I've been stalling for time here, and I have a little bit, because sometimes I get information that I'm not allowed to share, and I gotta wait until they let me share it.
Okay.
So when they were doing the search warrant at your property, they did find a body.
What?
Yes, sir. And
where?
I'm not sure. Obviously, I wasn't there. I've been here with you, but they that they found a body out on your property. They believe it's a female, so obviously you know what we're thinking. That it's Heather, so that's like
Jesus Christ!
Yeah.
Why did you tell me that?
Well, I only heard about 2 breaks ago, and then I had to get my boss to authorize me to tell you. So that's just, you've been so patient with us, and I wanted to explain to you why this is extending, right?
Yeah, but I got nothing to do with this shit.
Okay.
I mean, I'm in I'm this mother, man.
I could see if I was in your position, I'd be pissed too. I
don't deserve this.
I'm sure, kind of like you're beyond tired.
Yeah.
But hopefully that helps you to understand why I need your help and
I'm telling you.
With me.
Yeah, bro.
Yeah. So
where? I know my property pretty well.
I can work on finding out a little more information on that outside somewhere. Beyond that, like I say, I literally don't know. I get little snippets of information, quick phone calls with the boss when I'm out of the room, right? So remember I said, on me, yeah, yes, sir. So let's.
Dude,
So you know nothing about it?
No.
Okay.
Back at the police station during Kevin's interrogation, the situation took a significant turn as the detectives discovered new information that further implicated Kevin. But even after that, Kevin didn't budge. He acted strange and kept claiming that he didn't know anything. Heather's death was an overwhelming shock to the police officers. They expressed profound remorse, regretting that they couldn't have made the arrest earlier, which might have saved her life. The timing was tragically off by just 1 day. The officers were particularly distressed by the knowledge that they couldn't get to Heather in time. They were deeply saddened for her sons, who were now left without their mother. As the interrogation with Kevin Eastman went on, his responses remained inconsistent and troubling.
I went over to the house because I know that she gets too drunk, and I don't want her to lose her job.
Okay.
And I'm sure her car won't start if she's been drinking past a certain time, past 8 p.m. And she drinks past 8, she knows her car won't start. Then I've been with her on the phone in the past, and it's just easier to just go over there and make sure she's up and give her a ride.
And then you dry heaved a couple times in the sink?
Yeah, like 20.
Okay. So what room?
Was all fucking, I don't know what you call it.
Can you get a trash can?
Kevin, breathe. Okay? Hey, Kevin, pick your head up and breathe, okay? In and out. In through your nose, and out through your mouth.
At times, he claimed a lack of memory regarding the events, attributing his amnesia to an old head injury. At other moments, he implied that someone else was responsible for Scott's death.
Kevin, what room was it in? Was it in the living room?
Gentlemen, I can't say. I can't say I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is the only thing I've got. My word, and I promised. I can't give that up, please. I'll give up my whole life, but I can't give that up. I know it doesn't make sense.
But the most shocking part was Kevin's reaction when he realized that Heather was actually dead. The entire case left the officers grappling with feelings of guilt, sorrow, and the heavy weight of a still unsolved mystery. The officers, frustrated by their inability to extract more information from Kevin, eventually decided to leave him alone in the interrogation room. And what happened next was truly concerning for the detectives. As Kevin sat alone in the interrogation room, detectives caught him in some extremely strange moments. Saying prayers and singing songs, Kevin seemed disoriented as he reflected upon the dire situation he was in.
Please let it be alive, out of body in the burn pile. Please. Amazing grace. I see the moon sees someone I wish I could see. Frère Jacques, Frère Marjon, Frère Marjon. Give me back the clicker.
Meanwhile, the police conducted a thorough search of Heather's apartment, uncovering what appeared to be blood splatter in various locations. They found a particularly large stain under the front doormat, suggesting this was the spot where Scott was ambushed upon entering the apartment. There was so much blood that it had soaked through to the wood floor below. Detectives believed that he was struck on the head before having his throat barbarically slashed. The presence of defense wounds on Scott's hands indicated that he'd made a desperate attempt to defend himself during the attack. Even after hours of interrogation, Kevin Eastman, the only person who seemed to know the complete story, remained uncooperative, strange, and silent. Nevertheless, all the gathered evidence pointed only to Kevin Eastman, who also had a strong motive. Having been rejected by Heather, Kevin didn't want her to be with anyone else. Detectives believe that Kevin was driven by jealousy and overpowered by rage, which led him to first kill Scott and then Heather. They had a strong case against Kevin, and hence, on February 16, 2020, they charged him with the first-degree murder of Scott Sessions and Heather Frank. The global pandemic and the complexities of the legal process contributed to a lengthy delay, taking almost 2 years before Kevin Eastman's trial could commence. In April 2021, Kevin entered a plea of not guilty to multiple charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder after deliberation, tampering with the deceased human body, and tampering with evidence. He underwent 2 competency evaluations, both of which concluded that he was competent to stand trial. The trial finally began in the summer of 2022, where the prosecutor framed the case as fundamentally centered on issues of power, control, coercion, and revenge, ultimately describing it as a case of domestic violence.
Unfortunately, what you're going to hear is that Heather Frank was in an on-again, off-again domestic violence relationship with the defendant, Kevin Eastman. And that had occurred over a period of 5 years. And like domestic violence relationships, that cycle, you're going to hear that there were breakups and there were makeups.
During the trial, his defense team persistently advanced the same narrative that Kevin had presented during the investigation. However, despite their efforts, the jury was not persuaded by Kevin's version of events. The prosecution, on the other hand, presented a compelling counter-narrative and said that Kevin Eastman had not wanted to lose Heather Frank. They argued that Scott and Heather were still in the early stages of becoming acquainted and that Heather had no discernible motive to commit such a violent crime. Instead, the prosecution asserted that Kevin, driven by jealousy, was responsible for murdering Scott. They claimed that Kevin then forcibly involved Heather in the grim task of disposing of Scott's body. This portrayal of events painted Kevin as a central figure in the crime, seeking to manipulate and control Heather to cover up his actions. And to bring Kevin's violent and abusive nature to light once again, they brought Heather's sons to the stand.
How would you describe the nature of the relationship between your mother and the defendant while they were together before the breakup in December of 2019?
I would say toxic.
I want to take you back. Can you tell the jury about the first time you knew the defendant had physically harmed your mother? Do you remember about the time frame that was?
Yes. It was in February of 2014. I'm not sure the exact date that it took place.
Can you describe for the jury, first of all, what injuries that you saw on your mother?
When I seen her, she had a slash in her throat, like a knife, like a cut in her throat. I believe it was her right side of her face was really beaten up, like really bad. It was black and blue. Her wrist had been broken, and it was in a, I don't know what you call it, one of those.
Like a sling?
Sling, yes.
You also knew of your mom's relationship with Mr. Eastman.
Yes.
And you knew that relationship was rocky.
Very, yes.
You knew that there were times when the two of them would split up.
Judge, I'm going to object as to leading.
I'll rephrase it, Judge. Did you know if there were times where the two would split up and separate?
Yes.
Was there numerous times that they would separate?
Yes, ma'am.
The prosecutors alleged Kevin also killed Heather because she was an eyewitness to the crime. He was planning to burn her body too, but the police captured him before he could do that. On July 20th, 2022, a jury found the 50-year-old Kevin Eastman guilty on all charges.
So dispensing with the caption as it relates to count number 1, murder in the first degree involving victim Stanley Scott Sessions. The verdict reads, we the jury find the defendant Kevin Dean Eastman guilty of murder in the first degree after deliberation. As it relates to count number 2, murder in the first degree involving victim Heather Frank. The verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant Kevin Dean Eastman guilty of murder in the first degree after deliberation. The jury further found that this was an act of domestic violence.
Kevin Eastman received a sentence of 2 consecutive life terms without parole, along with an additional 27 years to be served in the Fremont Correctional Facility in Colorado. Despite the gravity of the sentencing, Kevin opted not to make any statement during the hearing. In contrast, the courtroom saw a significant expression of emotions from the victim's family members and friends. Among those who spoke out was Stanley Sessions, Scott's father, who addressed the court to share his thoughts and feelings about the case.
I just wanted to fill in a few blanks, and I wanted Mr. Eastman to know the consequences of his actions, that he can maybe roll around in his head. Maybe he can figure out a way to become a better person. I've lived 82 years. I think I have some experience. When he took Scott's life, he started a chain reaction that I'm sure he doesn't know anything about. Scott's mother was lying in a nursing home in North Glen, expected to live not very long. And you can imagine, and I don't mean to be selfish, I just as an illustration, you can imagine what it was like for me to have to go tell her on her deathbed that her son had been murdered. Her response was, who would kill my Scotty? And she never mentioned another word. She lived 2 more months and passed away. He deprived her of telling him goodbye, and he telling her goodbye.
The case of Scott Sessions and Heather Frank was tragic, driven by jealousy and anger, which left many grieving. And although Kevin's conviction did bring some measure of justice, it could not undo the pain and suffering experienced by the victims and their loved ones. Scott Sessions, whose life was cut short in such a gruesome manner, would be remembered for his potential and the promise he held. Heather Frank, whose own tragic fate got intertwined with Scott's, was a beloved mother whose loss has left a deep void in the lives of her 3 sons. The testimony and statements from Heather's sons, along with the emotional responses from family members like Scott's father, Stanley Sessions, were a reminder of the human stories behind these headlines. Each person involved had been touched by the ripple effects of the violence. Do you agree that murdering Scott was solely Kevin's plan and Heather was really forced into being a part of it? What do you think transpired between Heather and Kevin after they disposed of Scott's body? What could have triggered Kevin to kill Heather too? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. The footage you just saw was taken at the exact moment Christopher Gregor realized police finally knew what had happened to his son. One horrifying and heartbreaking secret recording had changed Christopher's life forever. Police became involved in the situation when Corey was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. Corey just wanted to impress his father and keep him happy. But the father had more sinister intentions towards his own son.
Hey, Gma, does God see what my daddy does to me?
All his evil secrets were about to be revealed, and they would shock the entire community.
I told him God sees everything.
On April 2nd, 2021, just days after the disturbing footage of Corey running alone on the treadmill, a tragedy occurred. Christopher Gregor, 31, Corey's father, discovered his son unconscious and completely motionless around 4 p.m. the following day. Corey was immediately taken to Southern Ocean County Medical Center in Stafford, where he was examined by professional doctors. Inside the room, a battle had begun to save the child. Despite the doctors' quick and dedicated efforts, Corey's condition worsened. During a CT scan, he suffered a seizure that further complicated his fragile state. Despite every attempt to save him, Corey passed away at 5:03 p.m. on April 2nd, 2021. But the doctors were about to find something even more horrific. As they examined Corey, they discovered numerous bruises on his body. The treadmill video also hinted at something sinister and almost answered what could have led to such a tragic outcome. The investigation that would uncover some shocking details that would leave the whole community stunned. But there was another surprising twist in the case. Right after the doctor had pronounced Corey dead, his father, Christopher, made a call to Child Protection Services. He reported that on April 1st, 2021, Corey had been with his mother, Brianna Micciolo. She quickly became the center of a growing investigation. However, some details from the history of how his parents raised him would end up revealing a sinister pattern. In 2014, the story began with Corey's mother, Brianna Micciolo, getting pregnant with Corey. The father was Christopher Gregor. Initially, Christopher was unaware of Corey's existence. It was when Brianna applied for state assistance that the authorities first learned about Christopher as Corey's possible father. In 2018, a paternity test confirmed that Christopher was indeed Corey's father. This marked the beginning of a custody battle between the parents, despite them not being divorced as they'd never married to begin with. Both wanted to take responsibility for Corey's upbringing. As the custody battle unfolded, Christopher started complying with child support orders, although it took nearly a year for him to begin visiting Corey. Later, the custody arrangement was settled in court, granting Christopher custody of Corey on weekdays. Ultimately, they lived with Christopher's parents in Monroe, but later, Christopher moved to Barnegat. Brianna initially agreed with this decision, believing it was important for Corey to have a relationship with his father, hoping it would provide a sense of completeness to his life. But this decision would change her life forever. As Corey began spending more time with his father, Brianna noticed some unusual things. On one occasion, when Corey returned home from his father's custody, Brianna noticed he had a busted lip. When she asked Christopher about it, he claimed it had happened accidentally during a soccer game. It was only a moment of time before the horrifying truth of the situation would come to light. However, that wasn't the only incident. Around Halloween 2019, another incident occurred when Brianna noticed injuries on Corey's face, arms, and legs shortly after he returned from Christopher's home. Corey also had a visible slap mark on his face. When Brianna asked Corey about it, he was too scared to say anything. But Brianna quickly realized that it was none other than Christopher himself who was torturing his own son. She knew something was terribly wrong, so she decided to take action to ensure his safety. She'd reported Christopher's behavior to the police and the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, or DCPP, but the authorities didn't take any action regarding the complaints. Despite all of Brianna's efforts, the case was closed without any action. This was just the start of a pattern where the authorities ignored Brianna's concerns.
You said something like, the more he did it, the worse it got, that pattern of escalation.
The more he got away with it. Yeah, he would get away with it. And he was noticing, like, I'm doing this to him. DCPMP obviously can't tell, or they just don't care. So everyone sees you as, like, this crazy person because you're screaming at cops, you're screaming at DCPMP. They don't like you because you're screaming at them. But you're like, what do I need to do?
I mean, this is what I call, Brie, where women can't win, because if you didn't take him, then you would be neglectful. And then when you do take him, you're trying to alienate him from his father, and the deck is stacked against you.
Immediately after her complaints, Christopher accused Brianna of being addicted to drugs and sought full custody of Corey. By March 2020, Christopher was granted sole custody of Corey by the court, and Brianna was left with only visitation rights. Even after losing the battle for custody of Corey, Brianna didn't give up. She documented multiple instances of unexplained bruises and even bite marks on Corey's body. She repeatedly alerted the caseworker from State Child Protective Services, but her pleas mostly fell on deaf ears. Corey often came home with fingerprint marks on his arms and legs, and once with blood pooling at the bottom of his eyes. His father's abuse continued, and years passed without any significant action from the authorities. Despite Brianna's complaints to the authorities, Christopher still had full custody. However, everything changed on April 1st, 2021, with a heartbreaking discovery. During a visit with Corey, he informed his mother about an incident involving the treadmill. He revealed that weeks earlier, his father had forced him to run at an unusually high speed. CCTV footage also recorded what had happened that day. The footage captured Christopher and Corey entering the Atlantic Heights Clubhouse Fitness Center on March 20th, 2021. The video showed Christopher forcing Corey onto the treadmill and then increasing the difficulty settings even after the boy fell multiple times. But this wasn't even the most heartbreaking part. Christopher believed his son was overweight, hence he should work out rigorously. It was clearly seen how Christopher abused his son, Corey. Shocked by Corey's statement about his father, Brianna had taken immediate action the following day. She applied for emergency custody of Corey and reported the abuse to authorities. But there was yet another letdown. Despite her urgent pleas, the family court judge denied Brianna's request, stating that there was no immediate danger to Corey. Little did they know the danger was just around the corner. However, on the same day, around the afternoon of April 1st, 2021, Brianna took him to a nearby hospital to get his bruises checked. Doctors examined Corey and assured Brianna that he was okay, though he had a few bruises on his body. Therefore, he was charged around 1 a.m. the same day from the hospital. Brianna wanted to keep Corey with her, but Christopher insisted on taking him back the following day on April 2nd, 2021, around 9 a.m. That day changed everything. Corey became severely ill and unresponsive while under Christopher's care on April 2nd. Christopher had rushed Corey to the hospital around 4 p.m., but tragically, after a few hours, Corey was pronounced dead. What shocked everyone even more was Christopher's reaction. Christopher blamed Brianna for Corey's death. He just lost his son, and to be playing blame games right after the tragedy seemed rather odd. But this was just the beginning. There were more twists to come in the story. Instead of mourning his son, immediately after hearing the news of Corey's death, he left the state for 3 months. When the police caught him, he again attempted to shift blame onto Corey's mother, Brianna. When Brianna received the news of her son's death, she was devastated. She felt overwhelming sorrow and regret for every decision that had led to Corey being under his father's care, which turned into a horrifying outcome in the end.
And sometimes I just want to say sorry, but I know I tried.
Because that happened a few times. Like, that video wasn't the first time it happened.
But she was determined to get justice for Corey with the help of the law. Finally, the trial began to determine the reason behind Corey Michiolo's death on April 30th, 2024. The prosecution, led by Christine Lento, opened the trial, stating that they'd sufficient evidence to accuse Christopher of murdering his son, Corey. Lento confidently argued that Corey's death was a result of consistent abuse done by his father. On the other hand, Christopher's attorney, Mario Gallucci, countered these claims by portraying Christopher as a responsible father. Gallucci argued that the footage from the treadmill had nothing to do with Corey's death.
At some point, you're going to see Christopher go over to that treadmill and speed it up. And you're going to see Corey fall. And you're going to see him pick that boy up 6 times. And 6 times put him back on the treadmill. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to like him. And I don't care if you like him. When you see that video, you're going to be horrified. You're going to be mortified. But I'm telling you right now that the evidence you're going to see of Corey's death had absolutely nothing to do with that treadmill.
Corey and his mom sat in the car in the parking lot, and they said goodbye for what would be the very last time. Corey was walking. Corey was talking. Corey was fine, except for his bruises. By 9:03 a.m., Corey was back inside the defendant's apartment. By 3:48 p.m., this defendant carried Corey's nearly limp body into Southern Ocean Medical Center. He reported that Corey was sleepy and had thrown up. Corey was admitted quickly. He was brought to room 6 in the emergency department. Corey coded. He was intubated. He coded again. He lost his pulse. And by 5:03 p.m., Corey was pronounced dead.
Dr. Larkin found that Corey's blood results from Southern Ocean showed incredibly high white blood count, high glucose, and high lactic acid, and said that's all indicative of sepsis caused by an infection.
Corey was alive and well at 9 a.m. when he was with his mom, and he was gone by 5:03 p.m. after only being with his father, this defendant. The state submits that after you've heard and seen all of the evidence in this case, you will be firmly convinced that this defendant is guilty of abuse and murder. Because healthy don't just die during the course of a business day, and neither did Corey Michelot.
And instead suggested that Corey died from sepsis, an infection discovered during a medical examination. The case presented differing opinions about the cause of Corey's death, setting the stage for a courtroom battle. This legal showdown took an interesting turn as witnesses testified and evidence was presented. At first, the case began to demonstrate Christopher's abuse towards his son. The prosecutor had called Corey's first-grade teacher as their first witness. The teacher testified that after March 2021, when Corey was under his father's custody, she often noticed bruises on his body.
Did you first see Corey that day?
In the classroom.
Did you make any observations of them?
I saw kind of like a burn, not a burn, but like it looked like kind of like a rug burn thing on his forehead.
And virtually?
Virtually.
And were you able to see him virtually?
I was.
And what, if any, observations did you make of Corey when you saw him virtually on March 29th?
I saw bruises on his cheek.
Is that the same as what you were describing from March 23rd?
No.
And did Corey attend school virtually on March 30th?
Yes.
Did you observe?
Yes.
What, if any, observations did you make?
The bruising.
Additionally, she observed a noticeable change in Corey's behavior at school. He'd become more withdrawn and quiet. These observations were presented to illustrate the potential mistreatment Corey experienced while in his father's care. Furthermore, Dr. Yi Kia-ong appeared before the jury and provided his testimony regarding Corey's visit to him with his mother on April 1st, 2021.
Who brought Corey to the emergency room?
His mother.
And what was the chief complaint when Corey arrived?
Patient has some bruises all over the body. They want to find out where those bruises come from. He was very scary, little bit scary boy, and he afraid to answer my questions. We marked down all over the body, and we saw like some bruises, abrasion. The most significant one is on the chest bone area, like about 5 by 5 centimeter bruise.
You tell the jurors what your impression was regarding the bruising that you observed to Corey's body on April 1st when you had observed him in the emergency room.
Some bleeding underneath of the skin for like a few hours to a few days.
And what other impressions did you have regarding the bruising?
Those bruises are in various stages, as I mentioned before. Some of them are maybe hours, some of them are maybe days. I cannot tell you exactly more than that.
And Corey was discharged a little after 1 a.m., correct?
Yes.
So he would have been discharged then on the early morning hours of April 2nd.
Yes.
Of 2021.
Yes.
And when you discharged Corey from the hospital, did you observe any symptoms of sepsis or infection or broken bones or any of these things?
No.
Dr. Ong explained that he observed bruises all over Corey's body, particularly on his chest area, and noted marks indicating bleeding beneath the skin. When questioned by the prosecutor whether he observed the symptoms of sepsis when Corey was discharged, Dr. Ong confirmed that he did not. This testimony strongly suggested that Corey did not die as a result of an infection. Dr. Yi Kya Ong's testimony also indicated that Corey appeared to be in good health before visiting his father's place on April 2, 2021, suggesting that something might have occurred during the time Corey was under his father's care. To clarify Corey's condition after visiting his father, another witness called to testify was William Doyle, a triage nurse at Southern Ocean Medical Center. Doyle provided his account of seeing Christopher bring Corey into the emergency room on April 2, 2021, shedding light on Corey's medical state upon arrival at the hospital.
Corey was in Chris's arms. His arms were over Chris's shoulders. His legs were dangling. His arms did not look like they had much movement to them. His legs did not look like they had much movement to him. His head was rested on Chris's shoulder. His head was his face was difficult to visualize. So when I first approached them, I knew that something was concerning, but I couldn't see everything I needed to see. So I was depending on Chris to convey a sense of urgency or unwellness that I did not get from him at first. It was more of a clinical description of what was going on, and I did not immediately feel I had to rush them back. I definitely knew it was concerning, but I needed just a little more information. If I saw Corey's face right away, it would have been much easier, but Corey's face was on Chris's shoulder.
The prosecutor asked Dr. William Doyle what his immediate observations were upon seeing Corey. Dr. Doyle recalled,
So I went over to them, and I was splitting my attention between Chris and Corey. But what I could tell was that there wasn't a lot of spontaneous movement from Corey. He was not really moving on his own. He appeared to have a lack of tone to his muscles, and there was a lot of support coming from Chris in keeping him in the position that he was in.
These statements justified Corey's severe and critical condition upon arriving at the hospital. To counter the accusations, the defense lawyer invited Christopher's mother, Carolyn Gregor, to testify about the phone call she received from Christopher regarding Corey and why he decided to flee immediately. Initially, Carolyn explained that she'd heard about Corey's health.
Because he was lethargic, something's wrong with him. Something's wrong, has to take him, you know.
She mentioned that Christopher had suggested that Brianna might have done something wrong to Corey. Then she went on to explain that they started receiving random threatening calls accusing Christopher of being a murderer.
He's getting phone calls at the house. On our house phone. Threats. People are, your brother's a murderer. You know, this was like, it was ridiculous how quickly.
So when you talk about how quickly, I'm trying to develop a time frame.
Yeah.
Were you and Mr. Gregor in the vehicle that you were driving to Southern Ocean Methodist when you see that book?
Yeah, I believe so. You know, it's like the whole thing was we were devastated. We're crying in the car. We're calling the police in the car because no one was there. There was no police, nobody. So we're calling the police. We're trying to find out what's going on. At some point, we get to the hospital, and no. And Danny calls us again.
This was the reason Christopher decided to flee. Christopher's mother also mentioned that Brianna had visited their house and threatened them. However, when questioned by the judge, Carolyn clarified that Brianna never made threats to burn their house or assault them.
I have a couple things to ask you to clarify.
Danny's calling you while you and your husband are on the way to Southern Ocean County, right?
Yes.
And then Danny later calls you again that same night to tell you that Rebecca Michelot showed up at the house.
Yes.
And you're saying that she's making threats.
Yes.
Except what you're really saying is she's saying Christopher's going to be charged with murder, right?
And she was saying things along the line, and I'm paraphrasing, that you people are going to watch it, and just crazy stuff, saying crazy stuff like that.
And was there a threat to burn down your house?
No.
Or to assault you?
No.
Assault your husband?
Not directly, no.
And the wanted posters are that he's wanted for murder?
Yes.
She only explained that her mention of Brianna making threatening calls was in reference to the treadmill video. Further, attorney Mario Gallucci introduced David Gregor, Christopher's father, and a retired New Jersey State Police officer who testified about meeting Corey for the first time. This testimony highlighted the emotional aspect of Christopher's parents. David appeared visibly emotional when discussing his only grandson, Corey.
Corey's first visit was in the beginning of August of 2019. It was just a visit for a couple hours. I remember it because Christopher went to pick him up. And it was a big day for us. It was my only grandson. He came for a couple-hour visit, and the preparation of everything at the house was about Corey. I remember going through I had 4 children, they all played sports, so I was going through all the old equipment now that the children were older and pulling out all kinds of balls and baseballs and footballs. And
when the defense lawyer asked about the treadmill video footage, David stated that he chose not to watch it because he didn't want it to be his last memory of Corey. However, he didn't deny that Christopher mistreated Corey in the treadmill video. In this way, attorney Mario Gallucci vigorously defended Christopher, but all the facts and statements became groundless when prosecutor Christine Lento presented the most crucial evidence, the manner of death, which led to the conclusion that Christopher was responsible for his son's death.
Corey died of impact injuries of the chest and abdomen with laceration of the heart, left pulmonary contusion, and laceration and contusion of the liver. In Corey's case, in that these injuries could not have been inflicted by himself with any kind of intent, it's certainly not suicide. These injuries, given their pattern and distribution, are consistent with having been inflicted by another person. Therefore, any death that is related to the actions of another person is, from a medical examiner's standpoint, from an epidemiological or public health standpoint, homicide.
Dr. Thomas Andrew provided critical testimony indicating that Corey's fatal injuries were the result of unforced trauma to his chest and abdomen, which led to a significant laceration of the heart. His expert analysis unequivocally classified Corey's death as a homicide, emphasizing that the severity of these injuries pointed to deliberate human actions rather than accidental causes. He also mentioned that there was no sign of sepsis infection during the forensic test.
There's zero, not one scintilla of evidence of sepsis or any other infectious process in Corey's autopsy.
But this battle didn't end there. There was another testimony left. Another forensic pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, presented a contrasting view to the Ocean County jurors. Dr. Baden asserted that Corey had died from natural causes, like complications from pneumonia.
Also based my opinion on is the CAT scan finding of pneumonia also present. So I think all together, the most likely cause of death was a very severe, rapid pneumonia. There are other causes that could also occur.
This testimony directly contradicted Dr. Andrews' findings and interpretation. The conflicting experts' opinions added complexity to the case, prompting jurors to carefully weigh the evidence presented by both sides in Christopher Gregor's trial. Despite arguments from the defense that Corey died of natural causes, such as pneumonia or sepsis, Linto stated that the treadmill video, recovered by the prosecutor's office, spoke for itself. Everything the jury needed to know was captured in that video. May 31st, 2024 marked the final day of judgment to determine whether Christopher was guilty or not after considering all the evidence presented by both the prosecutor and defense lawyer. Finally, the jury reached their verdict. Christopher was found guilty of aggravated manslaughter and endangering the welfare of a child.
Corey was subjected to an awful time on the treadmill that I've described. It was brutal to watch that treadmill video because you rarely see a child essentially inflict harm on himself in the beginning until his father starts to put him back on it. So it doesn't take a vivid imagination to consider the fear Corey's in at that point. Aggravated manslaughter count run first, followed by the flat sentence on the endangering count, such that the aggregate sentence is 25 years and that the jail credit of 885 days comes off the aggregate sentence. Another condition of the No Early Release Act is that defendant shall serve a 5-year period of parole supervision upon release, that he shall provide a DNA sample and pay for the cost the same. There are 2 $50 victim of crime compensation assessments, 2 $75 safe neighborhood assessments, 1 $30 law enforcement training and equipment fee.
But they dismissed the more severe murder charge against him of aggravated manslaughter, which carried a potential prison sentence of 10 to 30 years. However, if he was convicted of murder, Christopher could have been sentenced to life in prison. With this decision of the jury, the courtroom erupted with mixed emotions: relief and closure for some, sorrow and disbelief for others. Sentencing was set for August 2nd, 2024, where the full extent of Christopher's punishment would be determined. Meanwhile, amidst the criminal proceedings, another battle unfolded in civil court. Brianna Micciolo, Corey's mother, took action against the DCPP, alleging that their inaction and negligence had failed to protect Corey from the abuse that ultimately led to his death. Brianna's efforts to make changes gained strength as she received support from advocacy groups and people who cared about her cause. Corey Micciolo's story remains a somber reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by children and the collective responsibility to protect them. But it begs the question, was the right decision made by the jury?